Awesome.
Yes.
I even went do not disturb on Slack. So I was just like all my notifications from everywhere, right? Uh, okay, so hi, welcome to another episode of Behind the Shield. My name is Mike Strohecker. You guys have met me in previous broadcasts with Infusion Points. I am joined by
Jason Shropshire,
Jason Shropshire,
Chief Operating Officer.
yes, and Mr. Rob Hughes, CISO of RSA. Welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us on our Behind the Shield podcast. If you want to go ahead and give a quick introduction.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the CISO for RSA. So, and we've worked together for a number of years with you guys, and just happy to come on and kind of talk about whatever makes sense, FedRAMP or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, one of the first questions I wanted to kind of lead off with was, what, can you share a little bit of your journey to becoming the CISO of RSA? I know when we first started the engagement, you weren't the CISO, so I don't even know if you mind just kind of walking through a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, sure. I realized my intro was a little brief there. So,
Yeah,
just for those that might not know, like, maybe just a bit about what RSA does, and I can give a
yeah,
little bit more about myself. RSA is an identity company, so we focus on protecting identities. So we've been in business for 40 years, and over those years, RSA has done different things and focused on different things, and now we're very much focused on securing identities. And really across the enterprise, like in whether you have cloud identities um, or data center or a mixture. That's what we're looking at, and we're really pushing to bring passwordless to people and reduce that password risk. Um, from my side, from my standpoint, I've been with RSA about 10 years. And before that, I've spent a good amount of time in some life critical services with Philips, their Philips home monitoring space. And before that, I've kind of run my own business for a while. The website used to be called geek.com. That's passed through a few hands over the years. So I think if you go there today, it won't be anything like it used to be. But really, and when I started with RSA, I actually started in a non-security role, working for basically the technical operations. I was managing technical operations for all the SaaS services across RSA. And at that point, we were 4 different companies with different tech stacks. We had different clouds, and some AWS, some Azure. So it was pretty intensive, and we had some services that a little different than my time at Philips, where we had the healthcare and life critical services, but we had financially critical services where we had we would do some fraud risk detection for companies for both credit card and banking transactions. And some of those banks would put us in the middle of that transaction. So if you had a problem, we'd be blocking transactions, and that becomes that gets escalated pretty quickly.
pretty
So
fast. Yeah,
I got a lot of like good chops from both Philips and that role, and we had more and more like heavy duty compliance needs for PCI and PCI 3DS, which is kind of another level beyond DSS.
Mhm.
Um, and really got pretty deeply into compliance there, and kind of getting customer questions and feedback. And over the years kind of took on, so I jumped into the security operations role, managing that for the SaaS operations, and that gave me kind of a good view like all across the organization. And then when RSA separated from Dell and kind of split into 4-5 different companies, um, and some of those companies have been sold at this point. So when that happened, we had a CISO that left, and kind of gave me some opportunity to say, hey, you know, I have a lot of experience in this space. I kind of know the whole area, and kind of prove the sort of technical versus business
right.
Yeah.
savvy, and I guess emotional intelligence in that space, because you hear a lot with there was kind of a meme or a theme at one point, which I think we're kind of a little bit past, where like CISOs they hire people that are very technical, very specific, be like, we're not going to take any risks. Everything has to be this secure. And can the business do anything? No.
No risk
Right,
tolerance.
right.
Exactly.
It's funny you mentioned the history there of RSA getting spun out of Dell, and we had like a inside running joke for a long time here at Infusion Points, because we were always talking about Dell being our oldest customer, in this space, and we kind of lost Dell when they spun out some of their stuff to EMC, and then they sold some stuff to NTT Data when they did that acquisition. But they picked up RSA, we were actually picking up the relationship with RSA, which was still owned by Dell, so that kept us in Dell. And then the same thing with VMware. So we sort of had that continuation, and it was always a joke, like, when are we going to be out of Dell? Well, we keep finding a way to stay in. So
Yeah, well, we kept you in there for a while anyway, but I don't know if you're still in there after we separated, but
too many other separations. Yeah, I think we're finally off that one.
It's like the Kevin Bacon, how many connections back to Dell. So
yeah, I was gonna
Hey,
say
so-
that made me think of, like, every time I go and I talk to folks or salespeople at a security company or something, they'll always be like, "Hey, I used to work at RSA, or I knew someone that worked at RSA." So it's like definitely a small world in the security space. It's
It's the oldest name for me, because, like, I mean, who hasn't had anyone who's been in the industry for 20, 25, 30 years has had a RSA token or a few in their backpack or in their pocket. So it's kind of the to me, it's the quintessential, that and the namesake conference. I know that it's two separate organizations now, but still, it's kind of that oldest name in cyber. So it's been a real privilege to be a part of the story.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even, to me, it goes farther than even the tokens, right? Like, we all learn
Oh,
about the
way beyond
RSA,
tokens, yeah.
the RSA algorithms for encryption,
Yep.
that are still in use today. So it's really been quite the adventure working with you guys. When we really enjoyed the partnership, right? I mean, I really do feel like it's a partnership at this point that we've had with you guys. I mean, we were talking about it just the other day, Rob, about how long we've been working together. And it's, thinking back at it, it's like when we first started the FedRAMP process, it's almost like you and some of the other team members on SASOps were like, "Oh, you haven't been up here yet, Mike." It seems like you've always been here. So
yeah,
it's great. So
had to be 6 or 7 years at this point, and yeah,
exactly.
a lot of changes happen over that time. Like, if you had come up, you would go to our old headquarters. Now we don't have that anymore. Like, we went pretty largely remote, like, once COVID hit, to kind of protect the manufacturing folks that did have to come into the office. Like, you don't have a choice if you're working with your hands and touching things each day, physically. Like, to do that work, you've got to come in. And
Yeah.
for people like me on on the technical side, it's like, well, we can connect through a VPN and get all the work done. And we're on Zoom and Teams meetings all day internationally. It's like, where you do that is not always important, but I think it's that kind of interesting. You see a lot of discussion about the culture between in office and out of office, and a lot of discussion and debate about that.
So what are some challenges as CISO, like, you had to overcome for that piece, right? I know a lot of organizations had some growing pains when they went remote. And I mean, to me, the RSA tool, the IDP piece of it and going passwordless is kind of one of those tools a lot of companies are going to use or do use in this remote age for that identity proofing, right? So what are some challenges you had to overcome, and how, can you maybe speak to how you're helping augment some of your other customers with their remote culture?
Yeah, I think it was such an interesting time when COVID hit. I was on vacation when it started happening. We decided to go on the vacation, so I was in Florida. And we're like, well, we're seeing this, like, thing happen, and I don't really understand it fully yet. And people were still traveling, but people were starting to think about, should I be doing this? And so I remember during that week, I was on vacation, but I got a call like, hey, you should join this call. So I joined the call, and we got the notice that we were separating from Dell, that we were being sold that week. And this was just as COVID was like developing, and I think it was back in like February of that year, and just a really interesting time. Now, like on the plus side, being a remote access enablement type of
Exactly.
company, we got a huge influx of orders that basically like probably messed up our forecast for the next few years, because it's like, all right, you got this massive like huge quarter, and it's like, okay, well,
How do we live up to that again? Yeah.
Exactly.
do that every quarter now, and it's like, we kind of like explain like, hey, this is a little bit of a one-time event here, hopefully. But we were able to transition to being remote like fairly easily and fluidly, and I think a number of us had tested out when we're working remotely from time to time here and there. At that point, I think I want to say we were using Zoom as our centralized meeting function, and like we leveraged that quite a bit. We use Teams today, and we get we get similar capability, but we're all like very proficient with it now. And what happened is when we went remote from the office, we started hiring some people that didn't live near the office. So when it's like we got to the point where like, hey, should we kind of go back into the office? And it's like, well, who's gonna go in? Like, so we still have like core base near the office for sure. Like there's still a big, group of people like near the, the Boston-ish area office. But at the same time, we've hired people more different areas. We are a global company, so I've got teams in Cairo and in India, and so for them, they also have their own local kind of remote office culture, or in office or remote, depending on what they're doing. So for us, I feel like it was a fairly easy transition. There was one part of RSA that we relied on, like a secure room that was in the building. And
The
that
seed room. Is it where you keep the seeds?
All the seeds.
Yeah, it was actually, so we did have that, but on the RSA, this was a little more on the fraud risk side, where we had this secure room. So we had one in the US, we had one in Israel, and we had talked a long time about maybe like, could we access these things remotely? And we were like all prepared to do it, but we needed that like push of like, all right, what's gonna make this happen? And once that hit, we're like, all right, well, we can't have like too many people going in right now. It's not a good thing. So we made that push, did the right audit things around that, all the compliance pieces, documentation. And I think that was very successful from that perspective. But that was probably one of our big challenges, that when you have these things you're used to doing on site, can you do it remotely? And I think like it, and you mentioned, Jason, like how do we help our customers with that? Well, we use we happen to use like Entra ID Microsoft like as our directory, and kind of layer our products on top. So we use a lot of our own products, and we have pretty interesting use cases. Like for the size company we are, we have, we're global. We have manufacturing. We have development environments. We use a lot of cloud. We're multi-cloud. So when you put those ingredients together, we're kind of like a good test case for a lot of customer enterprises. Hey, can you authenticate from anywhere? And when you look at sort of the big providers like Microsoft, they're looking at, hey, everything works great for Entra if you use all Microsoft Entra stuff. Like, okay,
right.
And that may work for some companies that have decided we're going to focus on that. But if you have, if you're doing a little bit more, a little bit different, you're using like AWS, you're using like different things. You have data centers still that you need to work with. You have, manufacturing sites. You have cases where people aren't always connected, and you might need to use tokens or other things to use multi-factor. That's where I think we really excel, and we're able to bring a really high level of security as well as ease of use to all those scenarios and enable that. And we actually we partner pretty closely with Microsoft on that. So, and when we use them, so it's like I can talk a little bit of crap to them, but they're part of our infrastructure. We're strong partners with them.
Well,
but
yeah, I mean, this whole space is full of kind of the frenemies, or the co-opetition kind
exactly.
of space. And we encounter the same thing in what we do, kind of in our niche. Some of the folks were, one day we'll be competing something with them, and then the next we'll be inviting them to be the auditor for something we're working on.
Exactly.
So it's it's interesting that way. But you mentioned the use cases within RSA, being pretty broad, and then being broadly applicable to different verticals. I would assume one of those would be like government as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're big in the U.S. government space. We touch on some other countries and their government spaces, but really it's public knowledge. Like we're in the FedRAMP marketplace. We've been working with you guys to be in that space for years. So we've been in the marketplace, I want to say, for four or 5 years now.
Which was difficult for you. I talked to customers.
It was a journey.
Yeah, it was a journey, but it was kind of unique to RSA's situation because you guys have such a huge footprint of deployments in government already, and a lot of those were premise-based deployments, right? And that seemed to kind of it made it difficult for you guys to get a foothold on the cloud side, because deploying on-prem or a premise-based model was easy, and everyone knew that path, and it was kind of a known quantity. So the cloud thing that seems hard if there's this other option that's a lot easier. So that seemed to create difficulties in getting traction with agency sponsors and things like that. But we were able to get you guys through the JAB path when JAB was still a thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's how we sort of overcame that.
And part of it, like, it wasn't, some part of it wasn't necessarily for like lack of having like customers or agencies, to some extent, but it was,
Not at all.
How willing are the agencies to, sign off on that ATO? Do they have the right bandwidth to do that? Are they comfortable with it? So as let's say a small to medium like business going into that space, that you have some big players kind of dominating some of the space. It's like, okay, we're trying to get in there and establish a foothold. I think we have a pretty good foothold now, but it was definitely challenging. And I think, we, like you said, that there is, RSA has kind of gone through a transformation of being known for, hey, tokens on premise. So like when I meet some of these people that have worked for RSA, 20 years ago, it's like, that's how they think. And it's tough to like not start that conversation sometimes with that. But, for several years now, we've been really a cloud focused SaaS business. And, we have not only the authentication side, but we also have the governance and lifecycle side. So, we have kind of like this full array of like products out in the cloud, and it's nice that we have that, that we can do that kind of hybrid thing and combine the on-premise with that, which I think is one of our strengths for sure. But there is kind of a safety, like especially from like the U.S. government side of like, hey, how much do we keep on premise? And I think like every highly regulated space, like banks and governments have gone through this. It's like, hey, how much do we embrace the cloud? But it's like, well, with FedRAMP, I mean, that lets you, take advantage of that. Say, look, here's a place that's safe to do this, and it's allowed. So, hopefully you can take advantage of some of the cost savings and some of the, just some of the ease of use and the capabilities that you can get in the cloud that are harder to do on premise. Not everything's easy to do on premise. Like certainly, hear stories of people that used to have to carry around like 5 different tokens, on
Right.
on a keychain or something, and it's like, well, we're trying to make it so that you don't have to do that. In some cases, you might still need to do that. We understand that, but I think that there is kind of this, hey, like this comfort level in on-premise in some cases. And I think that some of the requirements that have come out where it's like, hey, you need to be FIPS and phishing resistant, like that's work to like kind of push stuff towards the cloud to be like, hey, this is how you get that phishing resistance with FIDO. And that's, you're
Right.
gonna get that typically on the cloud.
Well, that was a big conversation when with Rev 5, that requirement coming out.
Phishing resistance.
All of
Yeah.
our customers were scrambling to meet that requirement if they didn't already have it in place, and there weren't that many solutions on the market for it at the time. So that created kind of a narrow set of solutions that could provide that.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, and working with RSA, like their solution for it with the on-premise and the cloud integration for like with the FIDO, right? Because they, you've used a hard token for their on-premise solution, it'll still use FIDO for the cloud to meet these requirements. And I really think it's a very strong and secure solution that you guys have put together for that. And it's kind of, I don't know, I guess I want to say a one-off, right? Because there's not a whole lot of people doing it that way.
Yeah, well, like I said, there was only a few options on the market,
Yeah.
and we had to roll some of our customers to their product, so
Right,
to make it
exactly.
happen. Yeah.
Exactly. And I also want to kind of spin back just a little bit, to when you were in your FedRAMP process, Rob, and that was why I kind of was in the, I took you back to the COVID years intentionally because that was when we really were digging into the FedRAMP process. And I
Yeah.
remember being on the calls with the jab, and it was like one of the first remote jab reviews they did.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, we all had to go to Washington.
18F.
Yep. and go, and everybody sat in a room and they did the review. So I remember sitting, so our podcast room now is, it used to be a conference room, and this is the conference room that we sat in, for that jab review, with you all, back in, I want to say 2021 ish.
Probably. Caitlin's making noise over there.
Yeah. Caitlin's being disruptive in the back. But yeah,
but the room's much cooler now with it being dark mode.
Much cooler. I really like dark mode.
Yeah, dark mode looks great.
Yeah, I've just recently like realized that when I have things not in dark mode, they're so bright that like it's just like staring into the sun. I'm like, what is happening here? So I keep going in. Once you shift something to dark mode and you get used to it, you have to keep shifting everything over. It's like, okay.
Exactly.
And then you have that one app that like doesn't support it, and it every time you bring it up, you're like,
sunglasses.
And it was kind of funny. I went to DEF CON this year, and for whatever reason, the monitors they had to display were super bright. Maybe that was like the first year they used like OLED or OLED like type, just like super. They're so bright. And some of the presentation backgrounds were white, and it was like just hard to look at. And people were kind of shouting out, like, "Go to dark mode!" Like, it's like you're killing us with this. But
you're gonna blot out the sun.
Yeah, wild.
But like, aside from it being COVID and all of that challenge that we had to go through in the early FedRAMP days of RSA, as we were trying to get that initial ATO or provisional ATO through the jab. What were some of the biggest challenges that you feel that you guys had to face as going through the FedRAMP process, the authorization process? Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it was just the speed of the government and understanding kind of how to, have that language, kind of relating that specifically to controls, especially like when you're going through the audit part of it. You could say the thing that as a security practitioner makes sense, and hey, we're going to kind of do it this way. Like that's what I'll be thinking about, but you have to keep the regulation in the back of your mind and be like, all right, it doesn't matter. You have to notify them within 1 hour for certain types of events. It's like, you
Right.
got to, that one's drilled into my head. And at the same time as you're thinking about containment, it's like, no, you got to do a notification in the middle of this containment. So it's like, that can be a little challenging how you work around stuff like that. I think, the speed, I kind of mentioned that, like, and just the changing process, like even like today, I think we're probably in the space where, kind of want to hear from you guys a little bit, but if you agree, like, I feel like the Pete Waterman, head of FedRAMP now, is really pushing things towards making things a little bit easier, getting rid of some of that technical debt in the process of things where it's like, hey, the focus was too much on compliance and checking the box. And like, we actually want to make it so that we're doing security checks, which I like the philosophy of that, but it's a huge challenge to make that shift. And I think like, that's where it could get frustrating, where you're like, hey, I'm doing this for compliance. This is kind of not helping me secure things.
Yeah, this feels like it's for just a show, and not, but it really doesn't. What does it accomplish? Like, would I be doing this if the compliance reg said that I
right.
didn't say that I had to?
And to be clear, it's like I think the FedRAMP, like following the NIST controls, the baseline, like I think that's pretty secure. And like what they do, and like really focus on the patches and the vulnerabilities, like I think that that's a great kind of baseline starting point. I'd love to see, and the push towards like, FIPS and the phishing resistance. Like, I think that's also a great direction, like from the identity side. But, maybe some of the things where it's like, there's still controls that ask about, physical media and devices. It's like, hey guys, we're on the cloud here. Like, so there's just like some things that could probably be cleaned up a little bit,
Yeah, well, I think that's something great that Pete did, and he started bringing attention to this, like controls that didn't make sense for certain providers, right? So you bring up like device and media protection. Those things should just be handled by the underlying infrastructure that you're using, right? And for most cloud providers who are leveraging some kind of already authorized infrastructure as a service,
Right.
So for the most part, those things are accounted for. But Pete also sort of raised the idea that hey, certain CSPs are in niches, right? So you guys are in like the identity space. Do you really have to prove that you've got coverage for all these other areas that aren't more specific to the identity space? Was part of what he had raised. And I think that for too long, there was that stance in the PMO that, there was only a couple of requirements that you could say were not applicable, and the rest you had to have some kind of justification that you had it implemented,
Right.
when it didn't always make sense in certain controls based on your cloud. It sounds like that, Pete has pointed multiple times toward like tailoring, like even NIST originally said that these controls should be tailored, right, for the situation, not that you have to implement them at every layer of like at every cloud layer. So he's definitely brought, I think, a lot of attention to that. I think he's also brought the idea that, let's focus more on outcomes. And one of the complaints that we've had for a long time about the NIST controls is they're very myopic. Like you're narrowed in on a control, and it's like, are you ticking all the boxes to show that you're doing that? But you're not. There's nothing that shows how it all works together. There's nothing. There's no metric associated with like the outcome of access control. Like, are you meeting the outcomes? And I think that admittedly, they're experimenting with models that could do that. I don't think that they've quite hit it yet, but that's what the KSIs, even up through moderate now, are attempting to be more of an eye toward, is that outcome-based security.
Well, and I think it's also the way they're going to be approaching the vulnerability management through the new Vader vulnerability management and
absolutely, it's not as stringent,
response.
right? They're taking away some of the thou shalt,
hard line.
that you must.
Right.
But making it more, more to you describe the risk to your cloud, right? And that's your responsibility, and then the timeframes
Yeah.
flow out of that,
Yeah.
right?
Like
The
what's
remediation timeframes flow out of that.
like, and it makes sense, right? Because like Rob, I've been working with you for 7 years. Some of these vulnerabilities we look at, we're like, is this really a high impact vulnerability on your cloud, right? Just the way it's architected,
Just
right?
because it comes out of a scan tool doesn't
Because
mean
right, it
doesn't mean
doesn't mean it's
yeah.
publicly exploitable. I mean, what permissions do you need to be able to even perform this exploit, right? Like, I mean, it would have to be in conjunction with like a red team, like
The
that
kill
that went
chain
bad,
would
exactly,
yeah.
in order to get into your environment. So I think using that lens, and I mean, the way Pete that you brought up, Rob, is really trying to steer FedRAMP down those lines. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it will open up a path for other companies to your point to be able to get there, because I know his thought process is to expand FedRAMP 20 times, right? 20x. That's the whole point of it. And
Like 20 times the capacity.
20 times the capacity, 20 times the velocity, um, not 20 times the cost.
Right.
So
And I think 20 times the velocity is going to be a tough one. If I'm thinking like Moore's law, doubling every 18 months,
exactly.
and hit the wall at some point. But um, yeah, no, I think thinking back, like other challenges are just kind of the living and breathing like FedRAMP. Like if you're going from somewhere where you don't have FedRAMP, and then you have a FedRAMP practice, it's like, okay, there's how you interact with the business, and even like on the sales side, or like how do you do reporting across your business? How do you get metrics out of that FedRAMP environment? How much can you get? So like just some of the things that you might feel are like, hey, we kind of have this unified view of things now, but once you have a separate environment, you have to give some extra thought to how you can see the full picture across there. So it's definitely definitely some challenges in that space as well. Like just think of the business side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was really those challenges that led us to build a lot of the solutions that we have today. Was because we customers kept encountering those same challenges.
Yeah.
How to handle sensitive metadata, and vulnerability data, and stuff like that. FedRAMP is changing some and opening up more as to what can be exported out of an environment. But prior to the new leadership in place, it was very restrictive as to what even could even leave the boundary. So all those scenarios, led us to build Command Center, and
Yeah.
so we could handle ticketing, everything internal to the system, and customers didn't have to do crazy things like bring their Jira and Confluence and all that into Boundary separately, and buy a data center license. And
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It might be difficult if I keep going with this to have Atlassian ever come on the podcast.
Don't upset Atlassian. Yeah, so I did want to also kind of ask, because you had mentioned obviously RSA has other certifications besides FedRAMP. You have SOC 2. We don't typically work with you guys on those other authorizations, but I know you guys have them because working with your team, they're like, oh, I'm in this SOC 2 audit or this other ISO audit.
Yeah.
I guess what are there any challenges? I guess unique to FedRAMP that are separate from those other audits, or is there anything that the FedRAMP program was able to strengthen in those audits? Or did some of those practices make FedRAMP easier for you guys? Like, I know I asked you 3 questions in one, but
Yeah. So I think it makes me think of sort of our security programs foundation. Like our foundation has been on NIST framework. So that made it somewhat straightforward to kind of move into FedRAMP, because that's what FedRAMP's based on also, and it's very closely aligned. So that was somewhat straightforward, but really whatever framework you're at, like they have a lot of commonality between them. Like I think you're usually going to get 70 or 80% commonality between all the different frameworks out there that are your basis. So I think for us being US based and having that sort of sensitive government customer type of background, securing the most secure, for us it made it a little bit easier in that sense to kind of flex over to the FedRAMP space, because we had a lot of, we're basically living those controls day to day anyway.
Right.
So yeah, there were some nuances where it's like, hey, you were doing that, but you didn't document it this way, and we have to represent it that way. So that was where some of the adjustments came in, and that's what we had to work through, and you guys helped us out with. And I think there were some specific things that were kind of more just like FedRAMP specific, like the kind of the FIPS requirement everywhere, where we didn't necessarily have that in every other commercial part of our environment, let's say. But it's something that also, like when we've been able to make like some advances like that, we do pull it back into our commercial products and be like, hey, well, if it's really not that hard to just turn FIPS on, and we're using equipment that supports it, or environments that support it, or operating systems, why not just have that part of your baseline? So going to FedRAMP, being certified has also helped us like pull some of that back and make sure that the rest of our environment is covered with that. So I don't know if I hit all three things there, but
I think you did. Especially, one of the things that I heard resonate was that by doing the FedRAMP process, it was able to take some of those stronger security practices back and make your commercial solutions even more secure for those customers. So it's even benefited those customers
yeah,
just going through the FedRAMP process.
and there's even a benefit, I'd say, for customer assurance, where it's like, you have customers that will ask you, hey, do you have this compliance or that compliance? And we're a global company, so it's almost impossible to keep up with the amount of compliance frameworks or regulations for all the different governments, to a perfect level. But if someone's looking at saying, hey, let's say we need an identity solution, and hey, can we use them? Are they secure? How do they prove that? It's like, well, we have a FedRAMP space. You're not in US, so we're not going to use that, but we have very similar control set and framework that we pull back. Like there's not a lot of differences there. So just seeing that we're in the marketplace, I think, builds that confidence with customers globally, even, and can help kind of do the bridge that gap between like not having like all of that local certification in place perfectly, because it's almost impossible to cover, every country with every certification. But it's a very expensive thing. So if you're Microsoft, it might be straightforward. But if you're not, it's like, how do you do that? That's a big challenge. So
Yep.
FedRAMP definitely helps us in that story.
Yeah, a lot of our global customers are taking the similar approaches that they used for FedRAMP, and leveraging those for other global certification processes or other sovereign cloud requirements globally. Same strategy, same control. They try to stay within the same even platform, but it's just scoped differently, right? They would sort of lay down the same footprint, but maybe in European sovereign cloud,
Yeah.
in those cloud regions, instead of global regions.
Yeah. All right. Next question, Rob. How do you see AI changing anything as far as like RSA's product tool works?
Gosh, we're how far in and we haven't mentioned AI yet?
I know. How are we just now mentioning AI, right? So yeah. So how do you see AI affecting you guys? How do you see it affecting your FedRAMP program, or even commercially across the board? Think maybe not just your FedRAMP program, but just RSA holistically, from this identity provider.
So just like from a product, I mean, there's a few areas there, of course, but it's really AI is coming to mean that like a lot of the term nowadays, like everyone thinks about like large language models and chat GPT, they're kind of like foremost in our minds. But, and I've thought back and like, hey, I've heard this like push for AI and heuristics and like things like this before. And like, in fact, our RSA, we've had this thing called Risk AI in our ID Plus product for years now, back probably 10 years. And there was a time, and it was around that time, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, that the general consensus and security companies was like, hey, you need to have some sort of machine learning or some sort of AI in your product, or if you're buying security products, you should have AI in there somehow. With machine learning, heuristics, whatever mechanism. So there was like a push for everyone to, saying everyone, like all the different software, security companies, like they all had their own versions of that. And it wasn't large language models at the time. It was, all this different machine learning, things like that. So we've kind of like, just for the term AI, like we've had that ingrained for a while. Um, when I think about like the large language models, I think that that's just a huge challenge for things like data leakage, um, or data spillage. It's like, it's becoming more and more, at least for a lot of people, like a day-to-day tool. And you almost think of like, hey, you had your personal computer, well, then you had the cloud, and then you have this like AI layer like sitting on top now that people are interacting with that. And by default, all that data is out there in the cloud. And I was just talking to someone the other day about, hey, well, the first risk that you see is like, hey, what if some of your data got trained, someone uploaded some data into an AI and the AI trained on it? Like that was kind of the risk we were worrying about. Like, okay,
Right.
but then we've
Yeah,
seen,
that's happened a lot actually.
It
Yeah.
has. Yeah.
yeah, and then, but we've seen sort of like, there was the court case with the New York Times and OpenAI that, New York Times was saying, hey, you trained on our stuff, but they had a lot of difficulty making the chatbot reproduce that, and it got to the point where it's like, if I knew I put the exact thing up, could I get it to spit out eventually? Like, yeah, kind of. And it's like, all right, well, is that the big risk here? Or is the bigger risk all the logs that they're keeping of all the prompts? And like when you upload a file, it goes and sits in a file system somewhere. And yeah, it might get trained on it here, but it might be really hard to extract that out. And I'm not talking about a regulatory risk. I'm talking just the reality of, security reality of doing something. It's less compliance in this mindset. But this file is going to be sitting here, and what is the retention for that file that was uploaded? Whether it got trained or not, you might not have an immediate risk, but if someone uploaded 10 files and it's sitting in some AI company's infrastructure, how often do they delete those? They might delete them at the end of the day. That might be context
Right.
sensitive. Might put them in some giant storage blob that might not have MFA on it.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
Exactly.
like,
and as companies get more and more AI savvy, they understand the difference of running locally or running an enclave, a certain LLM on Bedrock or a platform, similar, versus frontier models. But there's so much shadow IT out there, that where all this business data is leaking, certainly up to the main platforms, even Chat GPT and beyond. So that to me, that it's just a huge governance issue, that I think everyone is struggling with, from what I'm hearing.
it is, and it's like, hey, it's sort of like, before LLMs were quite as prevalent, it was sort of like, hey, how do you guys solve for data security? And everyone's like, really hard. And now it's like, oh, well, we just added LLMs into that. Like, okay, well, it doesn't make things
Let's make it
easier.
harder.
It
Yeah.
didn't make
Well,
things easier.
and now it's like let's replicate our data everywhere, right?
Exactly.
So the LLMs can crunch it. So
Yeah. So it's a huge challenge from just the data perspective. I think to me that's like the biggest worry at the forefront. And Yeah, I mean, there's other things to consider certainly about like, hallucinations and like the cost or abuse of, some of the models, tricking models. There's it's a whole world, but I find that like a lot of the kind of tried and true things about how you manage data and how you interact with things, how you need to test things, like those are all still valid. So
Yeah.
in some
And
sense,
awareness training, like just
yeah, yeah,
it's the same thing we deal with security.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
as much as we have awareness training, inevitably we have people that fail it. Our customer, it happens in our customers all the time. And they're sent off to remediation. So you just got to keep drilling, um, the culture on good hygiene.
Yep.
yeah. And
Well,
there's only so far you can go with like I think awareness training and testing and pushing. Ultimately, you have to say, hey, if something does get in, which it inevitably will, you want to limit your exposure with zero trust and like kind of hitting on that. To me,
Yep.
that's
How can we prevent it? How can we find out if it happened? Yep.
Yeah, to me,
yep.
that's where like that identity layer sits. Like where it used to be sort of like, hey, firewalls protecting or sort of micro segmentation. Now it's like identity micro segmentation. You want it to, hopefully use some AI or some machine learning to say, is this a high risk or a low risk thing that's happening? And if it's above this threshold, let's challenge them. Like, all right, yeah, tell me your code or do a face recognition.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I know we're running up on time. Thank you, Rob, for joining us
You don't
today.
want to do a lightning round?
A lightning round?
Yeah.
I
we
mean,
can
Oh,
go-
if you
do you have time?
do you have a second for a quick lightning
I
round?
do have
Okay.
time. I can do a lightning round. Are
Okay.
you?
I'll let Jason has lightning round questions.
These
that
are
he
very,
asks.
very important questions.
very, very important.
All right.
All right. So any like a favorite TV show?
Let's see. So I was thinking about streaming. Well, look, it's kind of cliche maybe, but I did enjoy the last season of Stranger Things. I
Wow.
wasn't sure if I'd like it. Like it just seemed like more of the same, but I was like, they pulled it off okay. So I don't know
I've
if
got
it's my.
3 teens and a tween, so Stranger Things is like a staple.
It is in my
I
house
feel
as
like,
well.
yeah, I feel like I just end up so much watching either US or UK based crime shows where someone, an officer for police from like a big city, like has an issue and they have to go down and live in this like little remote thing, and then a murder happens, and then like that's the show, and I tend to kind of follow that genre.
Nice. Hey,
Nice. Coffee, tea, or energy drinks?
Coffee,
Oh, good answer.
black.
Um, ooh. uh, what's like a hobby?
Um, I'd say repairing stuff around the house, which I'm doing.
that sounds like my hobby.
That's a
too.
honeydew, not a hobby.
I know, but it's like I think I keep things alive a lot longer than my wife would like me to. It's like, we had like
Oh,
old dryer that we got when we bought the house 16 years ago, and like it's still functional and it's broken a few times, and it's like, oh, we just need this $4 part off eBay, and like I'll go fix it. And it's like, I think not everyone is going to have the patience for that. They're just going to be like, I'll spend my
yeah.
Saturday doing something else, and like just like that's fun for
Sounds
me.
very similar to Mike and I. I mean, we're DIY. We're experts at everything, right?
Oh yeah.
Hey,
Well,
man.
Washers, dryers.
Ice
YouTube is
makers.
YouTube is your friend, and
Oh,
all these
absolutely.
parts repair places.
Absolutely.
All right. If you weren't in cybersecurity, what other thing would you be doing?
Well, when I was in high school, I always like I read a lot of Stephen King novels, and I always
Wow.
wanted to just write like gothic horror novels. And I don't know, like I'd still like to write, but I don't know that that's the genre I'd pick today. But there's definitely a time when I was like kind of veering in that direction a little bit. But realistically,
Nice.
I'd probably be doing something else in the computer space. Going back to, if I wasn't writing gothic horror, I'd be doing more like just IT and cloud infrastructure and things like that.
Awesome. Great answers.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
you didn't ask the one staple question that I think you've asked just about everybody.
what's that one?
Okay, Rob, I'm going to ask Jason's question.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time to any point in time and have dinner with anyone, who would it be?
Oh man.
See, this gets everyone. It's not
everyone.
A lightning round question.
It's a long pause. And Caitlin has got her hand on her head because there's typically a long delay for this one. So
insert edit here.
Insert edit.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge student of history. So how about I'll just say Jimi Hendrix? That might be
okay.
Thinking about on the musical side, like I could have went pretty deep and went on the religious side, but I was like, no.
We're on the philosophical, or we had philosophical on the last.
We did have philosophical.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, Rob, it's been great having such a long running partnership with RSA and with you. We appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. All right.
And that's a wrap for the latest episode of Behind the Shield.
And if it's not us behind the shield, somebody will be behind the shield.
Someone's always behind the shield.
All right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully we could do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.